personally, your failures, your shortcomings. Boy, can I ever do this again? How do I let down investors, teammates, all of that? You take those lessons, you try to learn them. I don't want to learn a few more of these anymore that painfully, but you learn from them and things like that. And I've learned in my other journeys, when you see something coming, you got to pivot pretty quickly. You got to have the conversation, put the issue on the table, and as a leadership team, figure out the best path.
Welcome back to the Perpetual Growth Podcast, where we dive into the minds of extraordinary leaders building meaningful businesses, strong relationships, and resilient lives. Today's guest is someone who embodies courage, innovation, and execution. David Esposito is a former U.S. Army Ranger and combat veteran turned healthcare CEO, having led multiple biotech and life sciences companies to successful exits. He's now the CEO of ONL Therapeutics, a cutting-edge biopharmaceutical company working to prevent vision loss from retinal diseases. David's journey from West Point to the boardroom offers a masterclass in leadership under pressure, navigating uncertainty, and building teams that win with integrity. We talk about the lessons he's carried from the battlefield into business, how to create clarity in chaos, and what it really means to build something that outlasts you. So let's dive in. David, welcome to the Perpetual Growth Podcast.
Zach, thanks for having me. Look forward to the conversation.
Me as well. Well, David, as my listeners know, I always like to start with this question because I think it reveals a lot about who someone really is. What does growth mean to you right now in this season of your life?
Sure. No, it's a great question. I do think at the end of the day, we have to be looking forward and growing, reaching our full potential, all of those things. Otherwise, we probably stumble and have some trouble down the way. So I do think for me, growth at this point professionally is really moving our team and our company forward in our technology. So I'm a biotech CEO. Ultimately, we're on a path to try to help patients see their future. So from a growth standpoint, this is complicated. The science, the execution is complicated. And I feel like my own leadership growth while building a team to enable our ability to address that complexity in a meaningful way is a real foundational element to my professional growth right now. On the personal side, my wife and I, after 30 plus years, are empty nesters now, figuring out that life with 4 kids, navigating life. And fortunately for us, all 4 of our parents in their mid 80s, navigating life. So, that whole, how do we handle life as a family that's changing is another part of growth. You don't always, have a scripted journey for these things. So I think those are 2 big areas of growth.
That's a fact. My brain went down so many tangents as you're mentioning that. I like you. I have parents that are just on the precipice of 80 years old. My dad's 79. My mom's 75. Navigating some very interesting life journeys. We recently found out my dad has brain cancer, and it's been a very emotional season of life, especially when it was so unexpected. My mom, as an example, we always thought she was going to be the one because she's had over 50 major surgeries. Dad's never had any mental health issues at all. And then all of a sudden he's having these weird mini seizures. And lo and behold, there's a tumor that's growing around his amygdala. So things are moving well in that direction, but those surprises are so fascinating and interesting. It's the stuff that's unpredictable. And so often business is the same. And you talked about complexity. And I know I just glazed over a very emotional subject, and I did that with intention so that I don't get caught in the weeds on this. But, I wanted to peel back the onion on that exact subject. When you talk about complexity, the first thing that popped into my mind is a quote that I tend to live by, one of countless, is complexity is the enemy of execution. However, what you are doing in biopharmaceuticals and that aspect of science, you have to have a very long-term vision, and you have to have the wherewithal to follow through to take a new drug from concept to actual utilization in the market. I don't even know where to begin this question. Can you talk me through from a high level what that process looks like for you guys? it's almost hard for me to wrap my mind around. I mean, to me, it's almost like a moonshot, like quite literally. I mean, it's the virtual equivalent of deciding we are going to the moon or now to Mars,
Right.
just within biosciences in a smaller, more granular, literally cellular level. Talk to our audience a little bit about that. Where does it start, and how do you keep that process moving? And I have to imagine there's, so many unforeseen challenges. What does that journey look like for you?
I'll give you a sense of it, that obviously these are complex, multifactorial issues going on. But I think, the basic understanding is really there is great innovation going on in the US for healthcare. Typically, a lot of that resides in academic universities. I'm right outside the University of Michigan. I mean, there's just great research going on in big companies, but quite frankly, brilliant clinician scientists are doing really good discovery work on why do bodies get disease, or how do you heal from disease, all of those kind of things in those examples. And eventually you want to figure out within that cause, can you prevent the disease? Can you enhance health? All of those things. And in that journey, at least in our world today, it eventually evolves into some type of drug that blocks a receptor or protects a cell. We're in the world of protecting retinal cells of the eye, unlike skin cells that regenerate. After an accident, when you lose retinal cells, you don't regenerate them. So the idea of protecting what you have is really important to our long-term vision for the company, which is to help patients see the future. And that is protecting those retinal cells to see. But Zach, where the challenge or the complexity comes in, at the end of the day, the origins of this discovery work is science-based. The classic scientific rubric is, boy, if you have a question, do another experiment. Let's do another experiment, answer that question. In running a biotech company, or, propelling innovation from the lab to then the bedside to meet patients, there's always that tension of it takes capital, cash to do that. And you can't do it forever. There are patients suffering today. So the pressure of complex science and want to answer more scientific questions always butts up against limited cash runway and the desire to move fast because patients are in need. And that, for me, and maybe for your audience, is what really drops in the complexity I described. Because if you had all day and you had all money, you just keep answering questions with more science, but you may not get anywhere. But in our world, you're raising capital from investors, and you see on the horizon the potential to alleviate pain and suffering, disease in patients. You want to move as fast as you can. And at the end of the day, you have to make decisions to move the science forward, and it's a never 100% perfect. And you have to feel comfortable with that imperfection, so to speak, to keep moving the program forward. Hopefully that made a little sense on how I see complexity in working our way through a biotech company.
No, it does absolutely. I mean, a quote that came to mind um, is, or maybe it's just a standard and expectation. I mean, something that I've come to observe amongst the most successful entrepreneurs in the world is they more often than not have a very high tolerance for risk. They're not risk averse. We have to be willing to take chances, to make a decision, and we either succeed or we learn.
Mhm.
Sometimes the learning is painful, but it's also necessary. And I hope this question isn't getting too myopic, but even as we're focusing on this particular drug that you are just bringing into human trials and to market, or I guess actually you said you're about 3 years in, and we're moving into larger scale human trials. From the standpoint of sciences, I mean, how do you marry the global vision with, which is beautiful, with the actual discoverable finding of, like, okay, we're going to create something that helps to slow or prevent degeneration of those retinal cells? And is it like, and I even start to wonder, okay, and I guess, I think to myself, I'm blessed in that I still have perfect vision at 41 years old, which I've got friends since elementary school that were wearing goggles, right? And I'm like, is there um, is there a particular person or age category where this becomes even more beneficial or relevant? Is it partly luck of the draw and we want to step into where you're at right now and help with preservation from this standpoint? So, I mean, there's that aspect of the question, but then there's the inception. Like, how do you marry that vision with what is the first question you have to ask to even decide what direction, what problem you are trying to solve? I mean, that to me is a monumental feat. If you could speak to that a bit.
Sure. No, great question. So let me touch on a couple things. I typically our view right now at ONL Therapeutics and what we're working on, these are diseases of the aged pretty much, whether it's retinal detachment, advanced glaucoma, age-related macular degeneration. These are typically click along at a later stage in life. However, things like diabetes that bring about a lot of eye complications, people younger are getting diabetes that way. But typically these are older folks. I consider myself that group. I'm 57 now, so I'm in that bucket, believe it or not. And but ultimately, so that's the basket. But the discovery point, I'm not a clinician. So our founder, Dr. David Zaks, is a retina specialist at the University of Michigan. So he sees patients, he runs a lab, he's on the forefront of all of that. And it was David in his care of patients where he would have to tell somebody with one of these conditions, there's nothing more I can do for you. I've tried everything. You're in essence on a slow path to blindness. It was that clarity of problem that David then over the years in his lab figures out, wow, especially with the condition of retinal detachment, how can we help forestall or slow down the progression of vision loss in those patients? And it starts with animal discovery, boy, the common receptors. How can you block those? In our case, our drug blocks this a receptor called the FAST receptor that in essence protects those retinal cells regardless of the disease. And we quiet the inflammatory response. So a lot of times your body, when you having a disease, you get inflammation. We address both of these with our drug. But ultimately, it's that clarity of problem that sends a brilliant researcher like David and a team of research figure out, man, how can we stop this, slow this down, or promote healing much more quicker than what's out there. And so that's kind of the discovery process. And then to your comments earlier in the program, this is a long journey. You figure out how to do that. Then in our world, you want to make sure you have the appropriate intellectual property, so patents are filed. And then not only on a cash runway and time to market, like I described, that patent runway has a certain limited time. And from a commercialization standpoint, to potentially reward investors who are investing in this risk, you described it, this is high risk stuff. You want to be able to recoup that investment. And that in essence means moving into market and building a profitable business to return to those investors their risk capital.
Fascinating balance. This is an interesting question for me. I hope the audience finds this question interesting. I'm really curious in your mind's eye, what is maybe it's the convergent point or the divergent point of pharmaceuticals and nutraceuticals. The effects of our genetics, but also our ability to influence the body through epigenetics and affecting our own gene expression. Like, how do those things either come together or potentially move apart? Do they need to be looked at separately? Hey, are those questions that I have to imagine that you get hyper fixated on your lane. I mean, I know the best in the world. That's what makes them the best. They stay focused on that one thing. Is that a conversation point for you? Talk to me a little bit about that, if you would.
Sure. Maybe a couple thoughts. I mean, we're in the FDA approved prescription business, what we're working in today. The nutraceutical side, supplement side is a different pathway. However,
Yes.
albeit, I think in my journey in healthcare, 30 plus years, has grown in its appreciation of those, that may have been dismissed in years past. I think science is catching up on the role of certainly nutrition, food is medicine, and all the other supplements that can help people get along. So I think there's a worthy path in understanding that we're on the prescription path piece, but I think that is an important contributor to it. And then, ultimately the ability to see where that technology can play a role. And then ultimately, as I mentioned earlier, this stuff is complicated. So for us in a journey of developing a drug, you're right. At many times, we've created the path for this drug. It's not like, hey, I could just add something else while I'm in the middle of a clinical trial to this. You really can't. And these are 3-4 year journeys in a clinical trial. So many ways you do have to lay down a track and you hang in there. But your point on genetics, demographic background, all of those things play factors into patients' response to therapy and actually their acceleration or slowing down of disease. I think we're still learning a whole lot of that. There are fields like obviously in oncology where you have companion diagnostics. Boy, if you have this biomarker, this drug may work better in you. We're getting there in ophthalmology disease states, but there's still a lot to grow. But it just speaks to maybe some of the earlier points. Every drug doesn't work for everybody. And what's the background on that? I think we're getting to an age where we need to get very personalized medicine because your genetic makeup, different than mine, may have a positive or perhaps a negative response to a particular therapy. The one size fits all. I grew up in the pharma industry that, that seemed to be, boy, we would love a drug that works for everybody. The truth is, they don't for everybody, and we got to be a little bit better and more precise as to who responds.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. On that note, where do you see the evolution? Where do you see the pharmaceutical industry moving? Like, with the advent of new technologies, obviously AI is a very common buzzword today. Where and how are you implementing AI into your business practices? And whether be it your research models or any aspect of the business, I think it'd be more interesting to stay focused on that aspect of things. And how do you see that potentially influencing in the future the development, the finding, discovery of, and and design of new designer drugs? Is it going to get to the point in your mind's eye where we can quite literally customize relative to the genetic makeup of the individual? So there are fewer rejection rates, a smaller number of what's the word I'm looking for? The negative aspects, the
Side
consequential
effects or
aspects.
something like that. Yeah.
Side effects, yeah, thank you. How do you see the new technologies influencing the pharmaceutical industry and potentially propelling things forward?
Sure. No, it's a great question. I do think, for where we are today, healthcare somewhat is a data aggregation problem. There are all these disparate data sets. If we go to find your health records, you get some imaging work done someplace else. It doesn't marry up to the electronic medical record. You got to call somebody else for lab results. I mean, we're bringing that together to ultimately be able to leverage machine learning to identify who may be at risk earlier. We at ONL, we typically are using modeling to identify where we are right now, patients who are appropriate for our trial, to be able to find the right patients who are progressing at an appropriate rate in disease that we could see a drug impact over what happens to be an 18-month study that we're running. So those are some tools we're using today. And I do think we will eventually get to, we see it in some aspects of therapeutics, where you're really narrowing down the patient population because they have perhaps this genetic marker or this background. This drug will be most appropriate for them. I think that helps control costs. Helps control side effects, all of those kind of things that will get there. I tell you one area, Zach, that is really exciting about some of the machine learning work and in grinding through these large databases is not just focused on treating the disease, but focus on treating the health, the prevention aspect. So there are people like you and me that may be walking around, say, with a super high cholesterol. We're not taking a statin, but we never get heart disease. Like there is something protective about an individual like that who has all the factors would say, hey, high cholesterol, you're going to have a heart attack, you better get on a statin. But there's a fair amount of people who have that, don't get it. There is a lot of research going on to understand why don't you get that cardiovascular event that everybody else would, even though you have that major risk factor. And so that's a real positive trend to where we move from treating health, from accentuating health as opposed to focusing on disease. And it's an interesting twist that I think a lot of these large language models and data aggregators will help develop a whole new line of drugs to develop, which are the ones that really accentuate those traits that prevent you from getting those diseases in the first place.
Yeah, that's an exciting concept too. I mean that you said something so poignant and so simple because it was said so eloquently that it'd be very easy to overlook the power. I mean, we're the whole idea of moving from, I guess, to oversimplify, reactive to proactive.
There
You
you go.
know, the proactive approach to healthcare is something that's so excited or so exciting to me because it's so necessary. You know, you look at the overall health of the majority of the US populace, and it's scary. On one hand, it keeps a lot of people in business. On the other, quality of life is not getting better. We've gone through this unique bubble, and people have to start making better decisions. Thankfully, people are getting option or they're being presented with more and more options to actually be more, I guess, anticipatory and proactive in the steps that they are taking to ensure that they have better quality of life, but that there's also a personal responsibility and accountability aspect to that. And we have to have that willingness. And I could go down the whole path of behavioral psychology and stuff. I won't for now. What I would love to discuss is I just like to take a step back, David, and have you talk a little bit about your professional journey. Um, Maybe from your time at West Point to the business world, what was that transition like? One thing that came to my mind with my oldest daughter is 17. She's in her senior year and she's talking about what's next. And there's this huge part of her that's terrified. She's like, Dad, all my friends, they know what college they want to go to and they know exactly what they want to do. And I'm like, yeah, honey, they think they do. But the reality is, look at the statistics. I mean, what is it, like 50% of people that go to school for any particular focus or degree of education end up in that role. And of that 50%, there's a very small percentage that are actually happy and fulfilled and enjoying what they do. So main point to be said was one thing we've talked about was, is the military a great choice or option for you? And so I'm just curious to see how did that time, maybe what led to that decision for you to join the military? And how did that experience contribute to who you are, your leadership today, the evolution of the businesses that you've started and exited? Maybe speak to some of the challenges that you experienced along the way. I'd just love to hear a bit more about you.
Sure, I'll try to give the Reader's Digest version of that one, but I think it starts similar to what you described with your daughter, and I think probably many of the people that you have on your podcast. I mean, there is a need to have a purposeful calling above and beyond yourself, and I think the military was a great attractor to me in that, service to our nation, defending freedom. That was a very aspirational calling for me at a young age. My high school journey, I was a pretty good pole vaulter, and I grew up in New Jersey, and West Point's right up in upstate New York. Used to go to a summer camp there as a kid and thought, boy, that caught kind of the first bug on what's this all about. And then you realize, boy, that's a really wonderful journey in serving our country and all of that. That kind of gave me the initial bug to do that. And through that though, and maybe to the broader question like that has always been a strong tie for me of um, recovery from downturns and problems, and that aspirational calling of really working towards serving something bigger than myself, whether it was defending freedom in the military, or here we are today on a purposeful calling for us to move forward on preventing eye disease. All of those things are important. Zach, can you hear me okay? I feel like I froze. You good?
Yeah, you can. I can hear you fine. The image is
Okay.
frozen at the moment, but as long as I can hear you, that's great.
All right, perfect. So I think that has kind of driven a part of me for a while, and I feel like I reach my best when I'm involved in purposeful work that way, and it's just super important. I think the related question, maybe what have I got through that military experience to leading biotech companies? I think the big piece is for me is really around, you know what, you have to set the example, whether that's kind of energy wise, enthusiasm wise, really do that to set the example for others to follow. And then the second piece is around, you got to be prepared for the unexpected. Whether it was my experience in the military or in building early stage companies, nothing goes as planned. You got to be prepared for that.
Hmm. Now that is absolutely true. Any company that I've consulted for or worked with, it's like the idea of the best laid plans. I mean, nothing. It's very rare that you present a plan, execute on it, and everything goes flawlessly without fail. And I think that can probably be said for most aspects of life. But one thing that you said that is so important is the power of purpose. Pursuing something that is bigger than yourself, and particularly being able to lean into that purpose, that deeper seated, that why, when things do get hard, because it's not a question of if, but when. And I'm really curious for you, would you mind, if you wouldn't mind, sharing with the audience maybe some of um, the challenges that you went through, and what was that guiding light, that greater purpose that you lean into, and how did you lean into it to carry you through some of those obstacles, and what evolved from it?
Sure. I'll give you an example. You can hear me okay, Zach? Sorry
I
about that. It
can.
seems like I got a little whirly bird going on in front of me with it, but hopefully you can hear me. So that's good. All right.
Yes.
Um, so, one of the things I'd maybe highlight in terms of challenges in my kind of professional work. So I was working and leading and building an early stage cancer diagnostics company. So folks of my age or older with an elevated PSA worried about prostate cancer. We were developing blood tests that would help better discriminate whether you should be worried and perhaps get a biopsy versus not. And at the end of the day, with a diagnostic test, a blood test, these are risk assessments for cancer. They're not exact, they're not perfect. And I can remember many times sitting in front of a doctor, helping them interpret results on somebody's lab result that would show a low risk for cancer, but in fact, they had cancer. And how do you talk through that misassessment on the test where somebody's really waiting on what you would call a false negative to really see whether or not they had it or not. Those are really tough discussions and decisions. And I think what that calling or that purposeful work is realizing the current test or methodology is better than what's been offered in the past. And so even though it's not perfect, you still can help men get a better assessment for prostate cancer risk. And I think you always got to keep that top of mind of what you're working towards for the health of patients to ultimately get there. But that's one example. I could give you a few more. I took a few companies into bankruptcy, Zach, so there's always a few of those painful ones as well.
Yeah. If you would, I would love to hear you explore that a little bit, because, everybody loves to share their successes. Most people are a little bit more trepidatious when it comes to talking about some of their failures, but, I'm a firm believer that our failures are oftentimes one of the they're one of the catalysts that sculpt the human that you are today, that now create the success that you're now experiencing. So, how did those talk a little bit about those bankruptcies? How did they affect you? How did you navigate those times, determine what's next? What did that do to your overall psyche? I mean, your belief in yourself. I mean, I would love to hear this from any perspective that you're willing to share.
Talking about some of these challenging times. So as I mentioned, in my journey of building life science companies, I've had a few good exits or successful ventures, whatever you want to talk about, but also have taken a few companies into bankruptcy. And one specifically I've mentioned, this was a hospital disinfectant technology, basically to be able to clean ICUs and surgical suites to just an exceptional six log kill. I mean, unheard of cleanliness that's needed in those kind of environments. Really innovative technology. I was a senior leader of the company and eventually stepped in as part-time as a CEO interim to help things get along. The challenge and what I maybe mentioned earlier with scientific discovery, sometimes you get so enamored with the technology that you get a little bit blinded to, is this the best market fit? And can we really build a business this way? And that was the case with this company. We were enamored with the technology. It performed exceptionally well in terms of achieving bacterial kill rates that were unmatched. The challenge was the system was a bit big and clunky. It took a few hours to do its job in a surgical suite or an ICU room. And the typical turnover of those places is like 30 minutes. And so it was great technology, but it was not quite the fit. And as a team, we kept trying to, pound away at how this is really exceptional technology and the performance is there, and just kept running that without realizing, boy, maybe we could pivot, find a better use of the technology, amp up the engineering and retool it to get back into the ICU. Unfortunately, we didn't. I was a part of that journey. I'll take full responsibility for it. We brought in new leadership, but you find out it's a little bit too little, too late. And we careened the company into bankruptcy. So I think for that, oh, and it's very to your point on your own psyche, like, boy, you're in these things, right? The psychologist will say, hey, don't absorb yourself too much, keep you're in, man. I don't know other way to you're in.
Yeah.
And so you feel it, personally, your failures, your shortcomings. Boy, can I ever do this again? How do I let down investors, teammates, all of that? It gets really hard, and you do get a professional jolt. I've been through it twice, and it's never easy. But I think you take those lessons, you try to learn them. I don't want to learn a few more of these anymore that painfully, but you learn from them and things like that. And I've learned in my other journeys, when you see something coming, you got to pivot pretty quickly. You got to have the conversation, put the issue on the table, and as a leadership team, figure out the best path. Now, we could talk for probably hours. There's a few point of views around the table, egos get involved, and bravado gets involved. And before you know it, you're taking the thing over the cliff in bankruptcy. It's painful. And that's why, Zach, and all of this, the science is complicated, the regulatory requirements are complicated, but people are complicated. And as a leader, you got to manage all those personalities to hopefully move everybody forward. But that's also the complexity that we didn't touch on before. Science is complicated,
Yeah.
but leading a team in a high pressure stake situation is not easy either.
Yeah. Yeah. There's two really big takeaways I took from what you just shared, and thank you for your vulnerability on that. Is one, it's imperative that we fall in love with our product or service. I mean, without that belief, without that conviction, we're never going to have the wherewithal to make it through a lot of these proposed challenges. And at the same time, we have to fall in love with our ideal client and recognize that sometimes the idea that we had in terms of that strategic direction, the go-to-market strategy, whatever it is, while it was the best laid plans in the moment, is maybe not the greatest opportunity to capitalize on the market right now. It's the power of anticipation. It's so trite, but it's true. I love the old Wayne Gretzky quote, what made you the best in the world? Everybody else is skating to where the puck is. I'm skating to where the puck is going.
Mhm.
And that anticipation is so powerful. And then there's also the aspect of team. You can speak up, but that doesn't mean that everybody else is going to get on board. And we have to be willing to have the fortitude to have that voice, to make those statements and stand behind them, but also understand that we have to detach, and it is a team decision. And sometimes it's not going to work out either way. Um, I'm I'm really curious, how did you rebound from that? Because I heard it in there. There were the personal struggles. I asked myself, is this, can I do this again? Am I really meant for this role? What was that refractory period like for you? Was it like a couple days crying in bed? Was it, a week, a month? Like what did that look like? Because I know, in my professional journey, I've been through some very extreme obstacles, and it leads you to start questioning if you're really heading down the right path. And at some point, God throws out a sign and says, "This is exactly what you're supposed to be doing. You just have to keep moving." What What did that look like for you?
That's a great question. I mean, I think there's a couple of them. So to the point is, I still, even in conversations like this, I revisit it. I'm back in the moment, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it just, when you go through some really profound things in life, they stick with you. Again, maybe the psychologists give you a few steps to slide away from it every now and then, but you know what? You feel it when you talk about especially these things that are painful personally, professionally. There's litigation, money, all those kind of things come into it. But I do think it's a little bit of where I learned as an infantryman too. And my mom used to say when I was a young kid, just keep your chin up, David. Everything will be okay. That you got to get back in the fight, Zach. I mean, I learned that as an infantryman. I learned it through these journeys that. You know what? There is a moment where you're going to lay in the mud for a sec. Everybody will, but you got to get up and dust yourself off. I would say there's that personal conviction, having been through a few downturns over the years, that you realize you can get back up and get back in the fight. But I would tell you, that's why it's a need to have a close-knit set of trusted advisors. I would say sometimes they can emerge on the home front, somebody, but the truth is not everybody in the home front can feel what you're experiencing on the work front. And many times trusted friend or advisors that either have been through it or at least can just lend a sympathetic ear to say, whoa, that thing's tough. I'm here for you. Let's just sit and kind of work through it, has been really helpful. I think it just is what it is. But the point I made earlier too, I would just say, whether it's dust yourself off, get back in the fight. What is the fight? For me, it's purposeful work in healthcare. There's still people suffering from disease. You still need people to jump in and lead, brilliant scientists to get after it, and that energy eventually overcomes the whoa, is this thing going to happen again? Sure enough, for me, it did happen again, different
Mhm.
circumstances, but you get back into it because I'm a firm believer. Innovation is the path forward for the way of life we all want, whether it's in healthcare or technology, defense. Like, we got to innovate to keep the life we're going.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's fascinating. So many people present success as this like linear trajectory, right? But the reality is, an old mentor, he called it the success loop. It's like we're making progress, things are going great, we reach our next level. And then every time you do, that's when shit hits the fan, something goes wrong, and we loop back down. And it's this point where it becomes that decision point. Do I accept this as my current reality, or do I keep pursuing that higher purpose? And the people that stay focused on the higher purpose are the ones that go to reach the next level, and then stuff hits the fan again, and it's just this perpetual cycle. Now, ideally, we want to minimize the frequency and duration of those cycles as we're learning from those past mistakes, but the reality is life is going to happen, and one way or another, we are going to have challenges, and what we do next is of the utmost importance.
I would just jump in real quick, Zach, if you got to say, just you
Yeah.
made me think of one other point on that, talked before about this complexity and struggle between data, cash runway, time, all those things are a mix with it. But I also think it's a difficult gear for entrepreneurs or builders to get into because we're believers, right? We're believers in the impossible. We want to get up every morning, rally the team to just, we can do this, team. Let's go for it. And that kind of enduring optimism and passion is terrific, but it also creates some blind spots where you don't ever get a gear of checking in like, hey, I know superhero, you'll be able to climb mountains and break down brick walls. But the reality is, this thing is going to cost an enormous amount of money. It's going to just lay people all over the place. Is that really the brutally optimistic, we can do this thing you ought to be doing? I think, and I find myself in my own gear and teams and leading now, like, we have to be the ultimate optimist that we can do this. But yeah, you know what? Sometimes it puts a team through a real grind. Everybody's got their own threshold of misery, despair, and all those kind of. As a leader, you got to really gauge that. And I find myself that as I've matured in this journey, that's a spot I wait in the moment for a little bit, because you can just positive optimism run yourself off a cliff and the team with you, and you got to be careful on that one.
There's a lot of wisdom in that sharing, David. I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, it's one of the countless different dichotomies of business. I mean, I'm a firm believer in the power of relentless optimism, but to your point, it can also create blind spots. And we have to maintain that. And then also there's, like you said, there's I and there's we. And we have to understand that every person, just like every body, as we discussed, is different. And they all have different thresholds and levels of tolerance and ways they like to be motivated. And they also have a different purpose for which they pursue and find meaning in life. So beautiful, beautiful lessons. David, I had several big takeaways for me today. I mean, it was everything from, the power of anticipation. We've got to be very mindful of where our industry is going, the stage of life, or current stage of life of the niche or business within the industry, the product itself. Are we selling to the right market? We've got a great concept, but is this the most appropriate strategic direction to actually get us to the next level, or is there something else that is a more appropriate initial stepping stone to get us there? The power of why, the power of having a purpose that's greater than yourself to really propel you and carry you through some of these challenges, because it's very easy to get focused on me when in reality life is about we. We talked about the willingness to pivot. I love something that you said that I didn't really highlight, but what I heard from you was extreme ownership. It's easy when we go through these failures and difficult times in life to start pointing fingers and blaming, but the reality is that prevents us from learning if we don't look to and within ourselves first. And a really big one is when you're going through a tough time, you got to get back in the fight. And I think that is a very, very powerful lesson to learn. And one of the best ways to navigate those circumstances, I heard you say too, is having that inner circle. I mean, the people, the friends, the mentors, the people that can help guide you through what is otherwise a very challenging time. David, this has been an absolute pleasure. As we wrap up today's episode, I would love, where could our listeners find out more about you? I know we have, harvesttimepartners.com, and then you've got a couple of books. Would you like to mention some of those resources and places if our listeners would like to learn more?
Sure. I think certainly on LinkedIn, they can find me for sure. Accepting of any and all connections. ONL Therapeutics, our website for the company work. Harvest Time Partners, you mentioned. I've written a few books on the journey. My mobile phone is in every one of the books and on my email signatures. And I enjoy taking calls from people I don't know. It always gets interesting. So thanks for having me on the show, Zach. And I'd love to stay in touch.
Absolutely, myself as well. Well, that's a wrap for today's episode of the Perpetual Growth Podcast. Huge thanks again to David Esposito for sharing his story, one of service, strategy, and sustained leadership. If today's episode gave you something to think about, take 30 seconds to leave a rating or review. It helps more leaders like you find this show. And remember, growth doesn't happen by chance; it happens by choice. It isn't just about what you achieve; it's about who you become along the way. Until next time, keep going, keep growing. Thanks again, David. It's been an absolute pleasure.